Now it's time to shine a light on an issue or someone in the political arena. It's time for Political Spotlight. And the person right now in that light is David Mellor. Now, he was elected as Conservative MP for Putney in 1979, managing to hold his position for a whopping 18 years. And during his time, he served as the Chief Secretary to the Treasury and Secretary to State for National Heritage. And before politics, David was a practising barrister, even being appointed Queen's Counsel. The head of Coutts Bank, Peter Flavel, has resigned as NatWest tries to contain a crisis that might have wiped £1 billion off the share price. Meanwhile, on the menu, future of the group's chairman, Sir Howard Davies, hangs in the balance. Also, we'll be discussing Rishi Sunak as well. David Mellor joins me now. David, really good to talk to you. Wow.
Good afternoon.
I remember you from way back. I used to watch politics, and you were there, and I'd be like, David
Probably just a babe in arms, I think.
No, me? Gosh, that's so good. Exactly the right thing to say, David. We're going to get on just fabulously well. So, David, as you watch all of this, because in your day when you were in the political arena, everything seemed so black and white. It was so cut and dry. There was none of this ESG business or EDI, all this. Talk to me about your view on what's happening with NatWest, and should now Howard Davies also resign?
Well, I think NatWest is really awful when you think it's 40% state-owned. And I think that what has happened... Look, the job of a bank is to provide banking services. This bank seemed to think, Coutts certainly, which is, of course, wholly owned by NatWest, seemed to think that it was their job to kind of pass judgment on the politics of their customers, and if those politics, in their view, didn't work, well, then they would dispense with them. And of course, they took on the wrong chap with Nigel Farage, who is not someone to trifle with. And I'm thrilled by what has happened, because hopefully the idea of a bank being dominated by woke culture has been put to the sword. What we've had is the head of NatWest has fallen on her sword. The head of Coutts has fallen on his sword. One hopes, it's like Admiral Byng. Probably nobody remembers Admiral Byng. Indeed, I never had the pleasure of meeting him, but he was shot on his own quarterdeck, English admiral, in the 1740s. As the saying went at the time, pour encourager les autres, to encourage the other admirals to perform a bit better. Well, I hope that what has happened at NatWest will encourage other bankers to not start getting above themselves. Their job is just to deal with the money, not to say, well, I don't like what you think, so, we're not going to have you as a customer. They should lose their banking license if they try and do that again.
Well, do you think that we need to be doing something about these banks and having some sort of way where, whilst obviously they're private companies, although Coutts, NatWest is partially heavily owned by us, the taxpayers, do you think we need to have some sort of rule with them whereby perhaps they could take into consideration that they can't simply just get rid of customers? Because it's not just NatWest. There are loads of others who have fallen who are doing this same thing to their customers.
Yeah, but this is, I think, the situation. OK, it should make it easier to sort out what's happened at NatWest, because NatWest is 40% owned by the public. But in order to operate a bank, you have to have a banking license. That banking license should make it absolutely clear that you cannot choose your customers on the basis of their political beliefs.
It's unbelievable that they actually felt that they could be the arbiters of morality, because...
Well, particularly the banks, I hope you're about to say, when you think how immoral a lot of these banks have behaved consistently.
We bailed a lot of them out, in particular NatWest, RBS, that group. And the fact that some of their customers are probably way more worse than Nigel Farage in terms of what they're making, in terms of judgments that they're making.
The odd passing oligarch and so on, yeah, of course.
So it just
seems... This is hypocrisy. And, and maybe it's not over yet. I'm very disappointed. A good old friend of mine, Howard Davies, the chairman, I would have thought would have been on to this quicker than he was. And I think that, he needs to be certain that he wants to take the bank through the next stage, which is rebuilding public confidence. He himself appeared to think that what went on was all right. Well, Howard, it wasn't all right. It isn't all right, and it won't ever be all right unless you sort it out.
So what do you think then in terms of, and when you're looking now at the parties, so we've got, moving on to sort of the ULEZ and the Labour Party and the way the Conservatives were holding on to this net zero, do you think that perhaps Sir Keir Starmer could come into problems with regard to his sort of allegiance towards Sadiq Khan? And even though he's sort of said, oh, ULEZ, he's not really being very clear about where he wants to be with it. Do you think it could end up being their Achilles heel?
Well, I think the problem, Sadiq Khan should certainly be their Achilles heel, because I was just reading a piece in the paper today, actually, you may have seen the same piece, that the emissions from China are 31 times the emissions from the UK. China is a polluter that makes us look like absolute beginners when it comes to polluting, and we're expected to have these ULEZ rules, which will be crippling financially to a number of people who just want to have the opportunity to drive their car around outer London. And that is apparently causing too much danger to the planet, when, of course, the real danger to the planet comes from China and others like them. And that's, I don't see any point in us stressing ourselves out in the UK about our emissions when the Chinese emissions have gone up by so much and continue to rise.
But we're buying off them, so that's why their emissions are high and ours are low, because they're extremely productive, whereas we don't make anything, really. Do you think Tony Blair was right in coming forward and saying that actually we shouldn't bear the cost and burden of net zero?
Well, I think that's a big issue about net zero. But personally, I think the trouble with net zero is that it's a goal that won't make any difference to the world, but which will make a lot of difference to us. I think what needs to happen is that we need to be sure that net zero and the pursuit of net zero is not going to be crippling to the British economy, to no benefit. If someone could say to me, well, of course, if we had net zero in the UK, the world would be saved from climate change, well, that would be a different matter. But the fact of the matter is we could have net zero and we would still be in the same mess because the major polluters, China, and there's others like them, United States indeed, the major polluters will not stop polluting, and what we produce is, in way of pollution, is minimal.
David Mellor, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to talk to you. Absolute legend. David Mellor.